Hey there, U.S. historians. So today we're going to talk about the first presidency under the Constitution, George Washington's presidency. Okay, so most of you are probably familiar with George Washington as a general of the American Revolution. You're probably less familiar with him as, as far as his presidency is concerned, other than just the fun fact that he's the first president. Okay, so one of the key issues during his administration that we need to know is the French Revolution. So it is important to note that France helped the United States during the American Revolution. Okay, they were a key component in supporting us militarily, of turning the tide, especially at the Battle of Yorktown, of helping us gain our independence. Okay, and the expectation was then that this had kind of created an alliance, right? Where if the French ever needed the United States, especially in support of democratic ideals, that we would come to their aid. So 1793, okay, so 1793, that is the year where the French Revolution really kind of kicks off, right? You're going to have the execution of King Louis the 16th, okay? And so President Washington has a decision to make. He's like, do we support the French and the spread of democracy, overthrow of absolute monarchs, or do we kind of stay out of it, right? Because we don't want to get pulled into European affairs. We've heard this in Thomas Paine's Common Sense, that we're constantly getting dragged into European wars. Okay, so he's going to issue a proclamation of neutrality. Now, this is incredibly important, so I'd be sure to write that down, right? That's going to be our American foreign policy for the next 100 years, where America tries to stay neutral, tries to stay out of entangling alliances in Europe. Okay, because we're a young nation. We don't want to and don't think we have the power to be able to fight all these wars that really don't affect us. Okay. So a little bit about Washington's administration. Now, you don't have to know all the names and jot all of this part down, but what you do need to know is that Washington was all about trying to kind of bring unity, and trying to kind of coalesce around different ideas, right? He strongly believed that we needed to kind of unite as a nation at this time. Okay. And so he's going to basically create his cabinet of advisors, who are a whole bunch of different factions and different political ideologies. Because the two big ones you need to know is Thomas Jefferson. Okay. So he's Secretary of State. He's in charge of foreign affairs. He really wants to get involved in the French Revolution. Okay. He's all about democracy and spread of Enlightenment ideas. Okay. But he is definitely like an anti-federalist. Okay. This idea of limiting the power of the federal government, power to the people. Where Alexander Hamilton, he's the other important one you would need to know. He's going to be Secretary of the Treasury, and I'll talk more about that here in a minute. He definitely is all about the concept of needing a strong centralized federal government. Okay, not necessarily trusting the masses. Okay, because as we know with the French Revolution, you're going to see it become incredibly violent. Okay, so first off, Alexander Hamilton. So America is deeply in debt from the from the American Revolution. Okay, and some states are more in debt than others. I mean, certainly a state like Massachusetts, which was heavily involved in revolutionary activities, is deeply in debt. And so Hamilton is like, okay, we need to have like a centralized fiscal policy. So the federal government should take on and assume, responsibility to pay off those state debts, right? And to make it into one national debt so that it's more kind of centralized. Okay. And the best way to do that is to create a national bank, the Bank of the United States. Okay. Now, he will be successful in doing this. Okay. Now, the Bank of the United States is a private institution, right? It's basically trying to organize all these small local banks under one large one that has a federal charter, to try and to create a united, centralized fiscal policy. Okay. And so other things that he's going to implement, one is protective tariffs. Those are taxes on imports. to try and protect American industries so that it's more expensive to buy British, manufactured goods. And so people will buy American. Okay. And the last one here, and this is going to be particularly divisive, is, you know, the Articles of Confederation did not have the authority to raise taxes. Okay. He thinks this is essential, one, for paying down the debt. And so one tax particular that he's going to focus on is a tax on whiskey. Okay. So I'll talk about that here in a moment. Now, we watched this clip in class, the room where it happens. Okay. We're going to have this meeting of the minds, right? Of Thomas Jefferson, of James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. Okay. You have like Aaron Burr here hiding under the table, but that's just because he wants to be in the room where it happens. Okay. Where they're going to have this meeting, this exchange. Okay. Because again, Thomas Jefferson does not want a national bank. Okay, because keep in mind the banks are in the north, right? This is going to benefit Alexander Hamilton's state of New York, where a lot of banks are located. Okay, but they agree to create the national bank in exchange for moving the capital from New York City to Philadelphia to eventually, once they build in the swamp that is the District of Columbia, okay, a new national capital, right, which will become, of course, Washington, D.C. Now, back to the whiskey deal, right? So creating this national bank, right? Now the federal government is like, okay, we need to pay down the debt. So we need to raise taxes. So they're going to raise taxes on whiskey. Okay. Now keep in mind, right? Western Pennsylvania farmers, okay, that is kind of their form of currency, right? That's where they trade in, because a lot of the crops that they grow, I believe it's grain. Sorry, I'm not an agriculturalist. I believe it's grain is going to go bad by the time they get it to the coast to ship. So instead, they'll turn it into whiskey where it won't turn bad, right? And they can sell that. Okay. And so these Western Pennsylvania farmers like protest, like form militias and uprise and refuse to pay this tax. So Washington is going to accompany his troops to Pennsylvania to put down and stop this rebellion. Okay. And say, basically, we're going to, put down this rebellion by force if necessary. Okay. And the rebellion ultimately at that point, once the troops arrive, collapses. Okay. So why do we need to know this thing? Okay. Well, one, okay, this is kind of the big deal, right? So Shays' Rebellion, okay, that was in Massachusetts. Okay. Again, dealing with debt and economic hardships and refusing to pay taxes. Okay. That was under the Articles of Confederation. And so the federal government at that point didn't have the authority to raise taxes. They had no national executive branch, right? No president to command the armed forces. And so it was very difficult to then, there was no national army, right? They couldn't fund one. So it was oftentimes just raising militia. It's like, okay, we got to put down this rebellion. Let's raise this militia. And so it was very difficult, right? And demonstrated the lack of power that was needed, okay, the power that was needed by the Articles of Confederation. But on the Whiskey Rebellion, okay, this is a new government under a new constitution where they do have the power to tax. They just now need to convince the American people, like, yeah, you're paying these taxes, okay? And again, it's, the American Revolution, although it was about taxes, it was taxation without representation, right? Like, the people of the United States are represented in the Constitution, okay, to some extent, right? Of course, we've talked about groups that are not represented, that are marginalized, okay? So this kind of demonstrated that, yes, the Constitution is here to stay, and it will be successful in enforcing its laws, okay? So that's all that we have for today. We're going to get into much more detail on George Washington and his administration. Thanks, U.S. historians.